Good afternoon. Maybe we should start. This is the session 3 of track A, entitled World-Class Science and Technology Education for Future Talents. As you know, science and technology innovation is the source of nations' future competitive advantage, and so countries in the world are making efforts to educate and support science and technology talents. And while Korea is ranked highly in science and mathematics section of international student achievement tests such as PISA and TIMSS for high school students, it has yet to see a Nobel Prize laureate in a scientific field, thus bringing into question whether the current education system are capable of educating world-class talents. In this session, we'll examine the science technology education system of the world and Korea, and compare with Korea, diagnose Korean current education system, and discuss ways to prepare the science technology talents for tomorrow's changing society. I'm the moderator of the session. My name is Sejong Oh. I'm a physicist by training, graduate from Seoul National University as a bachelor's and Stanford University with a PhD. And I worked as a professor at Seoul National University, Department of Physics, from 1984. But early this year, I'm on leave of the university and became the president of the National Research Foundation of Korea, which is the largest funding agency in Korea for academic research and innovative technology. Sorry. We have two distinguished speakers in this session. Professor Ian White. He is the Pro Vice Chancellor for Institutional Affairs of University of Cambridge. He graduated from University of Cambridge with a PhD in 1984 in electrical engineering field, and he's now a Barnett Professor of Engineering and Head of Photonics Research, University of Cambridge, and a Fellow of Jesus College. And he is also now the Pro Vice Chancellor for Institutional Affairs of the University of College. And also he is serving as the Board of Governors in IEEE Photonics Society. And he received IEEE Photonics Society Aaron Kressler Award this year. And he is a well-known expert in laser injection system. And the other speaker, the second speaker of the session is Professor Lars Pearlescent. He was actually president of the Technical University of Denmark for 10 years, and he told me he stepped down a couple of days ago, actually. And he is now free, he says, but I'm not sure. He's still quite busy. He got a degree in master, the bachelor's in chemical engineering in Technical University of Denmark, and then he went to University of Wisconsin in United States, medicine, and it's interesting path, master's in applied statistics, and then he got MBA in international business, and then he got PhD in mathematical statistics. So he is also expert in MBA and as well as statistics. Now he also got honorary degree from KAIST last year. So he is well known in Korea as well. He was the member of the governing board of trustee for International Vaccine Institute, which is located close to Seoul National University from 1995 to 2001. And from 2001 to until 2 days ago, that is the 31st of October, he was the president of Technical University of Denmark for 10 years. And he also got awards in 1976 and 81, Schuell Award in American Society for Quality Control. Now, and we also have two discussants, Professor Jae-jun Yoo of Seoul National University and Dr. Sung-min Hong of STEPI, but I will introduce them later after the presentation from two speakers finished. I ask the speakers about 25 or 30 minutes talk each, and then we'll have a discussion session from discussant for about 15 minutes, and then we'll get the questions from the floor, and I'll give the two speakers some time for this response. So let's start with Professor Ian White for the World-Class Science and Technology Education for Future Talents.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Professor O, for your very kind words. May I at the outset say how grateful I am to have been invited to this conference, which I find fascinating. It's a great honor for me to be back in Korea time and time again. I'm impressed by the immense advances that the Korean people have made, and it's certainly the case this time that it has been a delight to see how well things are going here. I also feel slightly awkward in this presentation because I'm aware that in the UK we have much to learn from members from other countries around the world in general, and Korea in particular, and therefore I have been very grateful to hear what I've been told in the last day or two, but I hope my comments will be of some interest. It's said sometimes that when you're trying to look into the future, it's quite helpful to look into the past. And in this slide, I'd really simply like to outline some of the changes that have happened to the university sector over quite a long period, because they are rather significant. If you go back 1,000 years or so, or right up to about 1600, you'll find that universities were few in number. If they did exist, they tended to teach very restricted subjects, theology, philosophy, medicine, or law, for example. And they were there mainly for people that were wealthy or for kings and queens or rulers. And by and large, the reason the universities were there were to benefit individuals so that individuals could take up specific roles, say, in the church or in religious organizations or in courts or ruling bodies. My own university is rather old. It's 800 years old. And as a result, a major change happened when printing was invented. This changed the way we taught and the way our students learned dramatically. And after 1600, a number of new universities, particularly across Europe, grew in number. And gradually up to 1900, more and more subjects were added. And very gradually, industry started becoming involved in the output of those graduates. The graduates would go and earn wealth. But notwithstanding that, even up to 1900, much of the role of universities was to benefit individuals, so individuals would go on to succeed in their work. During the 1900s, however, that changed significantly. Education started to include scientific research, and scientific research led to advances, and that led to massive expansion of the university sector, particularly in Europe and America and various other parts of the world. And as of now, if you look at 2000 and beyond, you'll find now that there are more than 15,000 universities worldwide, that their roles are well beyond that of simply supporting the individual, but that they include research and indeed economic impact in addition to education. And very much so are they there to give global mobility for talent or for individuals, and nation states are increasingly using them for competitive advantage. And as a result, the role of leading universities has changed a lot from the days where they were there for education, religion, learning and research, which is the case in our old university originally. And you can find various reasons now for universities to exist as follows. First, obviously, they still have a major role in educating and training citizens, and particularly, however, allowing much greater social mobility within a country, benefiting in many cases now from international engagement, which is really a key role for leading universities. Secondly, and very different from the old days, universities are being looked at as a rich source of research, commentary, and evolutionary and transformative ideas. They're looked at as being an expertise base, and indeed in that sense a resource base on their own, even if you exclude the role they have in teaching individuals. They're there to generate new knowledge, discovery and invention, and governments are often calling them as independent advisors. Most recently, particularly in response to some of economic crises, they're being regarded as vehicles for growth. There to enhance indigenous industry and business, the industry and business within a country, but also being used to attract investment from other countries into a country to support the economy. And finally, they're often used as a vehicle for enhancing international reputation and to give countries greater recognition. And those roles are very different from what were originally the case when universities were created. Now that's meant that in recent years there's also been a change in attitudes to the role of research in universities. So you look at the different ways in which research leading universities are classified, you can find that they have also changed. So in this slide, if you go from the left to the right, you'll see that initially most universities would focus on doing research and then publishing it. And one would tend to assess the performance of the university simply on the fact they'd got journal and conference papers, they'd maybe got research grants, and they'd had consultancy activities. But as the years have gone off, various advanced metrics have been brought in. What are the research impact factors of the university? How many citations have been awarded? How many editorial boards are the academics part of? These have become more metrics. And then, once that's happened, greater scrutiny has been given to how many prizes have members of staff of the university won at international level. How many prestigious lectures have they given overseas? What visibility have they given to the country from which they have come? And then finally, increasingly governments are starting to assess universities on the extent to which they're advancing thought, giving thought leadership, in the extent to which they're influencing other countries, other peoples from other backgrounds in their views, and the value they have to the ecosystem and the value they have to the national reputation. And those are very different metrics and very different activities that universities are being sought to gear in. So if I then ask the question, well, what is the future? Clearly, there are quite a lot of dynamics. Because you go back to the original vision of university, it's all about people, and people change, and you may disagree with this portrayal of the way in which mankind has changed. I struggle with it myself, but there is a real question that whatever universities ought to do, it ought to be to reflect what people are going to do in the future and how they change. In recent years, however, in many countries, universities have been greatly affected by changes in economic activity. Often, much of the funding of university comes from a country or a government, and if that government has economic problems, by and large, universities will be affected. And clearly, the recent credit crunch, the downturn, this is shown by the Dow Jones Index in the recent years, the crash that's happened, has had a profound impact in the way university roles are considered. Now, in that sense, it's quite interesting to see, however, what universities done have continued to grow. You can argue that this is inappropriate to show in the context of university activity, but if you plot the total traffic over the internet, which is shown in the red line, you can see that in no way was that ever affected by the internet. The exabytes per month across the internet grew and grew and grew, and therefore the use of knowledge, albeit maybe some of that knowledge is not of great interest to universities, has grown relentlessly. What has, however, changed is how much governments are prepared to pay for the pursuit of knowledge, even if its volume grows. And therefore, in recent years, although the role of leading universities hasn't changed, in some countries, universities have been asked to focus much more on innovation and also much more on resetting or rebalancing the economy. And that demand that's been placed on them, for example, in the case of some American states, where the local state governments have started to question the relevance of local universities to their local businesses, is now raising quite a number of questions about the structure of universities themselves. Now, in those countries where this has happened, and the UK is one of them, there have been a number of immediate responses. And what I've tried to do in the rest of the talk is just outline what responses I'm aware that have been made by universities who are aware that they need to contribute more to national life and the need for growth in the face of economic challenging times. The first is the one that you would expect any organization to make in tough times, namely improve yourself. So improve the quality of your governance, improve the quality of your activity, invest in your faculty, have them as better people, ensure that your infrastructure is the best it possibly can be, and altogether have an improved organization. And many universities are putting a lot of effort into that at the moment. The second, which is a key one, has been to focus universities on what exactly their role should be given where they are. I.e., how can you deliver locally pertinent, i.e. that's particularly suited to the locality, but yet globally relevant education? And I'll give an example of why that has changed, that the impact of this has changed a lot in recent years. This is a result of a study done by the Global Engineering Deans Council, which I was a founding member a few years back. And it's quite interesting to see the number of graduates coming out across the world who are engineering based. So if you look at Europe and the US and Canada and put them all together, then the total number of engineering graduates from that geographical area is, roughly speaking nowadays, equal to those coming out of Latin America. And if we take Europe, the US, Canada, and Latin America together, then nowadays, the total number of graduates coming out from that part of the world is, roughly speaking, equal to China and probably less than it as years go ahead. Now, any university system has to recognize the dynamics of those sort of changes in population in assessing what is the best course to provide for the new world that we are in. Then there's the issue that many universities are addressing is how can we make science, technology, STEM education, medical education, more attractive to the top students? Because if we want to have leading engineers or leading technologists or leading scientists in the future, the best way of starting that is by having the best students. And in many countries in this world, in recent years, there's been a challenge in allowing that to happen. And the challenge has been due to the fact that universities have had to balance various demands on them in making their educational system attractive. Top students often want to lead or feel that they're leading their field. And yet, we all know, as was discussed yesterday, we're in a world where collaborative activities are more and more important. How do we balance it? We need to have a curriculum, a strong curriculum. Look at how in many of these fields within STEM, the total body of knowledge within my lifetime that's new exceeds that ever existed in the field before altogether. The curriculum is very dense. How do we give time to teach what we know, given that we also want to allow to innovate? And how do we ensure that that is vision-driven? Let me explain these points in a little bit more detail. It's interesting to look how innovation has changed over the last 2 centuries or so. If you go back to the 19th century, many of the advances, and before, many of the advances were made by individuals. The outstanding inventor, often working alone, would come up with the major discovery. If we move to last century, 20th century, that had started to change. It was often the very large groups, but by and large in a single location, say in one of the big companies, that developed the really major advances. because of the maturity of the field and the scale of activity, had to be done in teams. If you look into the 21st century, however, it's clear that that process is starting to break down, that actually the best innovation occurs not with teams in one place, i.e. corporate innovation, but with distributed innovation. Like, I've been very interested in recent years at Cambridge, how invariably if we have a competition on entrepreneurship, it's the team with individuals from all over the world that tend to win it, i.e. from the East Asia and Europe and the States. If we've got a team like that all together, they tend to come top. So how can you address this? Well, I felt, trying to be helpful in this conference, I'd go to ask one of the departments in the UK that I know have generated the most innovative students within the UK in recent years, and I hope this sharing of is some help. It's a department, very small department, it's only got about 30 staff, but in the last 20 or so years, the students have, I think, well, between 20 billion and 30 billion worth of companies has come out of the students. And they just gave me a few points to suggest to you, which is their learning. It may not be right, it probably isn't right for everybody, but I hope it's of some interest. And they just give their response in recent years. First of all, try and get the best students, obviously, but once you've got them, make sure you learn from each other, and you don't stop that. Secondly, make sure that your faculty, your staff, your teachers, span the full spectrum of the subject, right from theoreticians through experimentalists, any of the science fields, right through to businessmen. Why? Because make sure that they're in touch with industry, know its language, have industrial successes behind them, so that the staff not only are teachers, but they're role models. They're people that the students really would like to be like. And they leave the course with the passion that they want to be a success, just like their teachers were. And in that sense, take your graduating association, i.e. the association made up of your old students, and turn it as near into a business club as you can get it. Have it from as large number of companies as possibly, and have them back to benefit from the students coming up, because they'll often want to recruit them, but also to act as role models for those students. Minimize barriers to innovation. I know this sounds often easy, but certainly in my university it's proved to be extremely difficult to do and much harder. Encourage spin-out companies, what we call, encourage spawn-outs, i.e. graduates just going and starting their own businesses. And indeed what we sometimes call as snuck-outs, students actually, part of their course, taking time out to start their own companies. It's very easy to say you encourage it, but actually in practice, giving students the freedom to do that is not as easy as it sounds. And finally, and this is sometimes somewhat controversial, encourage students not only to serve industry in their projects, I do projects usefully, but also encourage them to try and think of the next innovation that might break that company, i.e. that might undermine their business model. The companies won't like it at the time, but actually they're often the first to recruit those students that have come out, who've actually really had those innovative processes. And therefore, in Cambridge in recent years, we found our own environment changing a lot, and we've learned a lot from that in the importance of the university engaging with industry generally. When I was a student, one of the reasons I moved from Ireland to England and studied at Cambridge was it was a nice country town. There was one university and nothing else except for fields, virtually. Now that is gone. In addition to the university, we have 17 science parks, each with large numbers of companies. We've probably got about 1,400 to 1,500 companies in what is still a small town. And there are a lot more people working, and we regard it as part of our university role to engage in that, to support the activity, to drive the innovation process, because it helps our own students feel that they can go and contribute, and it gives them an understanding of what they can achieve. And those companies, some of them are small, but many are also large. The next area in which universities are tugged often is this business about, is the subject curriculum-led or curiosity-led? And this is an area where I know there's been a lot of discussion over the world. If you look at school education or pre-university education, often you'll find that you can group the subjects into 3 areas that are highly relevant to innovation. If you want to develop a product, the first thing you need to know is you can make it and it's going to work, it's feasible. And sort of the subjects that contribute to that are science and engineering. If you want to then say, am I going to clearly have a business here, you immediately then need to say, financially, is that product going to be viable? There's no point making the product if it's going to lose money. And for those subjects, you'll tend to look at business economics and perhaps law and other related subjects. If, of course, you're in an area of the market where there are other products out there, where you're having to compete with other companies, clearly, the next thing about the product is it has to be desirable. You sell products because people at the end want to buy them more than they want to buy something else. And therefore, it's important that your innovation process has a desirable aspect to it, i.e. that the products are desirable. And in many cases, that involves skills that arise out of the arts, psychology, and humanities. And if you bring those 3 topics together, then innovation sits very nicely in between them, but it needs to draw on all of those together. And as a result, much work still needs to be done and is being done in what is the best way of balancing those areas, what's the best way of allowing students at times to collaborate with others who are expert in related areas, to allow that innovation to happen. And this is true of big company innovation as well as little. And of course then, finally, any curriculum has to lead to a sense of achievement. Students these days work best when they're motivated. Many recognize the world has got great challenges. If one can take those challenges and make them appear as opportunities, particularly for the engineering students, but also for the science, then both students, science and engineering, can tend to be much more strongly motivated, do better in their subjects, and also contribute more readily. I don't know if there's a joke that goes around the UK that the real difference between an engineer and a scientist is that the scientist wants to be famous and the engineer wants to be rich. And that often typifies the attitudes of students ultimately in where they go in the future. But if they don't know where the challenges are and they can't see their fields sitting that into the obvious area, areas that the world needs to move, then of course, in some cases, they won't do as well. And then finally, one area that I know many universities are looking at is what is the best way of creating partnerships with stakeholders? Universities are only one part of the picture in encouraging next generation to have just the right skills to meet future challenges. They can't do things in an isolated way if they're to be as successful as they might be. And the interaction with those partnerships is often quite subtle. And their links to government, their links to academic collaborators around the world, their links with industry and commerce, and indeed their links with the charitable sector, the third sector, are absolutely crucial if we're to develop the best possible students in the future. Now, I regret many of these links are quite detailed and subtle, and therefore I'll just share one example that we've been working on in Cambridge in recent years. As I've said, in Cambridge, there's great focus at the moment on encouraging students to exploit their ideas, either in spin-out small companies, new companies, or in large companies. And this chart really shows you one of the problems in the UK we've faced. If you look at the left hand of the chart, sorry, I don't have a pointer on me, I think. If you look at the left hand of the chart, you'll see I've drawn fundamental research. Over at the right, I've drawn market success. You've got a product, you've made a successful bid in the market. If you go from left to right, I've listed various business and technical challenges needed to take an idea from research and translate it into success. You go from road mapping, targeted research, pre-prototyping, pilot manufacturing, transfer to full production, and so on. If you look at the left hand of the slide, I've drawn where you would have responsive mode research, the sort of research that university would have, and then further across at the bottom, the areas where most people regard developmental activities as being. Clearly, if you want research to feed into real application, the research should lead up and overlap very nicely with development. If it merges seamlessly from research into development, then you will have a successful outcome. But often, in many places, the research and the development have a gap in between them, and they don't overlap. And the ideas don't quite work out very, very well. And we have put a lot of work into this from our side in developing a concept called the Integrated Knowledge Center. The things that we have done have been to start to insist that students doing relatively early stage research projects actually have to do business studies and road mapping associated with those works. Yes, the research should be curiosity-led, but it's right that the researchers take some time to be curious about what actually might come out of this, because often they can miss the really great opportunity. Often they'll go for the clever thing rather than the idea that makes the big impact. And we find it actually has enhanced the research that our students do, even if they're doing relatively basic research levels, by asking them to think of the commercialization. Because being forced to ask about how would you commercialize that gives them new research ideas that are better than they actually started with. Within that, then, we clearly, obviously, do things like get people that are used to business to work with them, all the things that you would expect. And we also insist on the work that they do to be relatively on an open platform, an open technology platform. The idea being that they use their research to develop better and better technology, but they don't lock that new technology into one place where it can only be exploited in one idea. We ring-fence the intellectual property once we've decided, yes, there's an application here, that can end up being product X. And so, but we keep the platform open for anybody to access, that if someone comes along with an opportunity in area Y and can do something completely different, they can use the advances of the research to get that product. And this activity is now fully established. I think just the one center, it's a very small center. We've got something like 70 companies involved. There are quite a range of products that have come out of this. Some have been transferred into large companies. Some have transferred into new startup companies. But out of the one technology platform, there are many different ideas working with many different areas. This is in the field of plastic electronics and optoelectronics, where people are making electronic posters and displays and various things like that. So in conclusion, clearly my time is up. I think this is a time of great opportunity for the university sector. Globally, there's no sign of anybody wanting to know less or there being less knowledge to know. But it is one where there are many conflicting demands. Universities are being asked to be global, but they're also being asked to be locally pertinent and locally relevant. And if we can make the most of that and find outstanding students to work in science, technology, engineering, and medicine, we have a really excellent future. At the course level, I've tried to give you some thoughts on the challenges we have going forward in how do we give our students the opportunity to see themselves as future leaders, but yet people that can work in teams. I've talked about some of the challenges in having curricula that really are state-of-the-art, that give students the knowledge that take them right to the frontiers, but also give them time to explore things and allow their ideas to be followed. I've highlighted the need for strong partnerships with stakeholders. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for nice talk. He really emphasized STEM education and excellence in the changing world and the university education. Now the second talk will be given by Professor Lars Pearlescent of Technical University of Denmark, and the title of this talk will be Fostering Global Talent in Science Technology, Engineering, Teaching, and Learning Strategy from the Point of View of DTU. Okay, please.
This is going forward, right?
Yeah. Yes.
There it is. Well, thank you for welcoming me this way, and I'm always happy being back in Korea. I've been visiting this country for about 20 years, so I've seen the development. And like the previous speaker, I feel humbled to give you any advice, since I think very often the advice should go the other way. Korea has been so successful that the rest of us would like to learn a lot. But still, we might have a few things that we could share and which might be of some interest. I hope so anyway. My talk, unlike my predecessor as a speaker, is focused on the individual student. So it's taking at the outset, what do we want to put into the brain of a student, as exemplified by the guy to the left corner. Apparently a Scandinavian student, but it could be a student from any part of the world. What do we expect such a student to be able to learn? And of course that would already ask us the next question, what should an engineering student do? And if we are only educating people in academia to go back into academia, for them to educate the next generation of academicians, then we're not producing much for society. Of course, some of our students should go back to or continue in academia to teach the next generation. Sometimes I feel it would have been good if they had spent a little time in an industry, perhaps even a lot of time there. But most of our students should, of course, be useful to society, and that sort of shapes what we should think of. Now, even though I was introduced as ex-president, I would like to stress it once again. When this presentation was made, I was president of this university, but as of, let's see, Tuesday of this week, I'm no longer. My successor, Anders Bjerklev, who used to be my provost, has taken over. So now I'm past president, but still, I think he would approve of what I'm saying, since we've been close colleagues for a very long time. Now, I guess we would all think that world-class education crosses borders. What a good engineer should know and learn in Denmark is not very different from what one should learn in Korea or Brazil or any other place. Now, to the left you see the world, and there is a tiny little red spot up in the left corner, which is Denmark. And then you see Europe to the right, and then you can see Denmark a little bit bigger. And of course you could enlarge it and make Denmark as big as you want. But as it is right there, you can see we are placed in the northern part of Europe, south of Norway and Sweden, and to the east of the United Kingdom, north of Germany and France. We are part of the EU. And are actually not only an isolated country in Europe, we are part of the European Union, but more important, we are part of the world. To give you an impression, the little dot which you may see in the Baltic Sea, it's a very small dot, the most leftwards yellow dot, that is about the size of Singapore. And we have the same population as Singapore. So from that perspective, the country is actually not that small, and the population density is not that high either. It's about half of what it is in the United Kingdom. I think I would give you a very short introduction to my university in order to better understand why we are where we are right now. Now, DTU was founded in 1829. Much later than Cambridge University and most of these classical universities, but very early for a technical university. École Polytechnique in France was older, Actually, the first American technical university, Rensselaer, is also 3 or 4 years older, but it is one of the early ones. It was founded by Hans Christian Ørsted, the discoverer of electromagnetism and the first person to actually produce metallic aluminum. He was at the time professor at the University of Copenhagen, but felt that there was a need for a new kind of university. He felt that the advances made in the natural sciences should be made useful to society through technology. And that was at the time a discussion in Europe and elsewhere. A group of people felt that they could not and probably should not reform existing universities, but rather start a new type of universities, the technical universities. And he started out with a university of only 6 professors, and they had 2 areas of study: chemistry. It was called applied science at the time, but it was really the beginning of chemical engineering, and also mechanical engineering. Later on came civil engineering in 1857. At the time, all projects which we today recognize as civil engineering was at the time considered for military purposes. And actually it was military people who knew how to build ports and roads and bridges and the like. And there was a big debate whether that belonged in a university, but we got it anyway in 1857. Electrical engineering came to our university as a new program in 1903. Again, a big discussion. Some people felt that this new thing, electricity, electricity comes and it goes again. What's the big fuss? It'll never be anything big. Luckily, the leadership of the university here, as elsewhere, felt that this was the wave of the future, and it turned out to be so. I remember as a young man that the same discussion took place at DTU, whether IT was actually an engineering field, because you couldn't really feel it. Wasn't it really linguistics or some kind of liberal art thing? Anyway, the discussion was overtaken by reality. Big industries shut up, and therefore we had to educate engineers in that field. Now, this is a new campus which were inaugurated in 1974, and that's where we are right now. I'll skip over that. And we got a new name. Originally, it was called the Polytechnic School, or called Polytechnique. It was really a translation, but we were renamed DTU, standing for the Technical University of Denmark. We had a merger with another smaller engineering school. And then in 2001, we got an act, a DTU Act, passed by our parliament with much larger autonomy. And that meant a lot to our university. We came to own our buildings, which we didn't beforehand. We got much more autonomy in planning our study curricula, in organizing our research, organizing our university. And it also meant that the president is actually not elected, but hired by the supervisory board. And all the leadership positions are hired people, they're not elected, including department chairman. Then we had a new merger in 2007, where we merged with a number of research institutions, which meant that we grew from being about 2,000 people, a little over, to more than 4,000, and today we're about 5,000 people. And that should be held up to the reality that we only have 7,000 students, so we can take very well care of those 7,000. And now we had a little bit of discussion whether life sciences was really engineering, because wasn't that something like biology? Shouldn't that be in the standard in the broad universities? Of course, I think, again, that discussion is irrelevant. Life science is the wave of the future, and we need that as much as the so-called classical disciplines. Now, we are doing reasonably well. The Leiden Crown ranking, which is, I suppose, the only one that's research-based. It's not done by journalists, nothing wrong with journalists, but anyway, this is actually done in Leiden. I think it's financed by the EU, and we are the #1 in the Nordic countries, #7 in Europe, number 57 in the world among universities. If we are taking only the technical universities, we'll be in Europe number 3, I think, at the present time, and I've forgotten the number in the world. And in engineering, we are also fairly high up, particularly considering that we are from a small country. But that shouldn't hinder us in doing the best we can. Now I'm getting to the real presentation. World-class science and technology education is not achieved by offering excellent courses in science and technology in a superbly coordinated fashion and delivered by brilliant professors. Actually, I think very many people would assume that that would be the case. What more could you ask for than the courses are excellent in science and technology, that they are coordinated well, and they are delivered by brilliant professors? I think very few, if any, technical university could actually say that they can live up to that prerequisite 100%, and certainly we cannot. But we are getting, I think, pretty close, as a number of good technical universities are. But the point is that's not enough. Going from 90% to 100% there is, of course, an improvement, but that's not where the big improvement is. So I would say that this is necessary, but not sufficient. Then one could ask, well, what more is needed? And again, I'll just read what we have here. World-class science and technology education is not achieved even if, in addition to what was stated before, even if the curriculum is carefully designed to allow the students to be brought to the forefront of human knowledge within their individual fields of study and communicated in a way so as to make the students understand the process of acquiring new knowledge through further research. Again, I think that over a cup of coffee, most people might agree, even people who know universities from the inside, that if we could actually supply that they get to the forefront of human knowledge, what more could you ask for? And certainly, if you also equip the students with an understanding of how to acquire new knowledge. But my thesis is that still this is important, but much more is needed. And these, what more is needed is divided into 3 different aspects. The first one is actually depicted right here. These are DTU students working on an so-called urban concept car. In Europe, there is a competition every year where students can bring prototypes, or there are various classes of cars, and they have to race against each other, not to maximize speed, but to minimize fuel consumption. This particular car is a so-called urban concept car. It should be able to carry one person. It should be put in such a way that it could actually be used in a city. It should be able to live up to the requirements of having it registered as a vehicle for urban use. And in addition to the driver, it should be able to carry a little bit so that you could drive to work or even shop a little bit. Now, when we started with this car, or rather, I should not say we, because part of this project is that there are essentially no professors there. There are between 25 and 50 students. And year after year, some students will leave the projects and new will come in. There's only one professor supervising what's going on. All the work is done by students. They even do not have technical help. If they need to weld something, they'll have to do that. If they need to construct new material, they'll have to do it themselves, cutting, whatever. Now, in 2005, this urban concept car was able to drive 671 kilometers per liter equivalent on hydrogen. And it was number 1 at that competition, 671 kilometers per liter. And our students were quite happy. But what it turned out was that they were not happy enough. In 2006, they said we could do better. They redesigned the car. This, in order to be so fuel efficient, they need to have a very small engine, because otherwise it will use too much fuel. So even designing the clutch, because if that's not designed very carefully, the engine will be shut down as you actually try to lift the clutch and get the car moving. Everything has to be designed in a special way. Actually, the next year, they got to 810 kilometers per liter and was #1 again. Again, new students came in and they said, well, hydrogen is all right, but DME, dimethyl ether, would be more interesting because that's a synthetic diesel fuel, and it can be processed from biomass, from natural gas, or even coal. And then they moved to another class and couldn't get quite as far up as, of course, since hydrogen is such a wonderful fuel. But the other fuel, DME, is interesting because it can be produced from so many ways. Again, they achieved 206 kilometers per liter equivalent and was #1 again. The next year, they went down to 5th place, 265 kilometers per liter, but in 2009, they made #1, 589 kilometers per liter, and then they changed the fuel once again. You know, I'm getting into details here because that's how these people imagine what should be done. This work is not done in a study. This work is not done with paper. This work cannot be done by mechanics. This can only be done if you know your theory. You must know thermodynamics. You must know mechanical engineering. You must know electrical engineering. Actually, these students learn that you can do nothing by yourself. The mechanical engineers need the chemical engineers, need the electrical engineers. There must be structural people. There must be all kinds of people. And the professor is not telling them what they have to do. They're also doing a prototype. And actually, I'll say the prototype is not a comfortable vehicle. You have to lie down very, very flat. And it's extremely uncomfortable, actually. And you have to weigh less than 50 kilos, otherwise you won't fit in there. But we have some young female students that will just do it. And in 2009, that vehicle could drive 3,549 kilometers per liter gasoline equivalent. And again, this is firing the imagination of the students. So the first point is what I call the ABC of engineering. Active interplay between science and technology must in its most fruitful form lead to action. Action is important. An engineer is not satisfied with a solution on a paper with 2 lines underneath the result. What have you produced? A piece of paper. These students have demonstrated to themselves that in conjunction with others, they can actually transform their knowledge into action. So that's the first thing of the ABC of engineering as we see it at DTU. This is a picture of our windmills, as you can see. I think it's fair to say that DTU probably is among the leading, some might say, the leading university in wind power research. And we own these stands. Now, what's so peculiar about that? Well, if you do the calculations, you can see that wind energy is not economically feasible, actually. It's fairly expensive because the investment is quite high. Now, why are you then putting in these windmills if they are not economically feasible? Well, of course, if we think of the CO2 emissions, this is a big problem solver because they do not emit CO2. Also, it is based on the idea that if we make generation 1 of these windmills, there will be a generation 2 and 3 and 4. And over time, we think that cost will go down and maybe cost of alternative or traditional energy, I should say, will go up. So this is a very bold idea going into a field that is not economically feasible, but having the notion that it will be. And that's the next point that I think should be put into heads of engineers. Action should in its most endeavoring form be bold in challenging conventional wisdom and established tradition. If boldness has not been exercised here, there would have been no windmills. Today, 20% of the electricity used in Denmark is actually supplied by these windmills. We believe we'll get to about 50% in 2025 or 30. And by 2050, perhaps 100%. Now you need storage. Well, how will you store this energy? We don't know. But that's the boldness of it. And in order to get our students to think bold, we very often, in many contexts, give them problems that they really cannot solve based on their curriculum. They get very frustrated. Where can I read that? And the professor will say, I don't know. I'm not the one who should solve the problem. You are as a student. But I do not have the experience, and I don't know how to do it, and where could I find it in a book? And the professor won't help him or her. He'll just say, well, this is a problem. Solve it. And that is a very troublesome and teasing situation for these students. But when they come through and they have time and time again solved a problem they didn't think they could solve, and occasionally the professor didn't think himself that they could solve it, it built this boldness into the educational system. The next thing I would like to show is this bridge. This is a bridge connecting Zealand, where Copenhagen is situated, and at a smaller island in Denmark, Funen, which is also connected to the mainland. Anyway, this is a bridge done where all the key persons are graduates of DTU. Even the managing director, who used to be chairman of our governing board at the university, he was the managing director of erecting this bridge. Now, this is a main traffic channel going into the Baltic Sea. So there will be big ships there, and that was a challenge. It was thought that the span between these pylons should be 300 meters, given the size of the ships at the time. And people wondered whether 300 meters would be enough in the long run, and then they said, well, perhaps we should say 350 or perhaps 400, and in two directions, then we need two channels. But people were creative here, and they said, well, maybe we should go to the limit of what can be done. And then they created, they created really a bridge that would not only be 2 times 400 meters. The span here is, 1,600 meters. And also, very interestingly, unlike many other products of engineering, you cannot make a prototype. There is no prototype. You build the real thing the first time. So there's no room for mistakes. In doing that, you have to be creative. It's interesting when you ask many people, tell us about a field that's creative. They may say being an author or a singer, a composer, something like that. But to be an engineer, you really need to be creative, because you have to create something that have never been done before. So that's the third, that's the C of the ABC of engineering, creativity. Such bold action must, at its most productive form, be creative in synthesizing new valuable solutions, products, and processes. And how do we build that into an educational system? Actually, by saying to all our students, if you're going to do a master's thesis or a PhD thesis at our university, you should do it in conjunction with a company, an industrial company, any company. And why is that so creative? Because now the professor cannot pose a problem that he knows can be solved. Now it's a business who has a problem. They don't know whether it can be solved or not. And the student must find a solution. And if the student cannot find a solution, he'll flunk the course or his education. That is a great inducement to do something. Now they both have to be active to start doing this project. They have to be bold in finding solution, and they must be creative. And we have never had a student fail by not being able to exercise the ABC of engineering. There may at occasion have been other reasons. But training the students throughout their studies of being active, bold, and creative, that's what we think make the engineers of tomorrow. Of course, in addition to mastering science and technology. So that's what we see as the next generation of engineers. A student does not become a world-class engineer alone by mastering science and technology in his or her field. A world-class engineer must have ingrained the ABC of engineering in the very exercise of his or her profession. And when that's done, my goodness, action, boldness, and creativity, then the eye opens of this student and they look into the real world and say, gee, there are problems to be solved, and I'm excited about it. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. The ABC of engineering, action, boldness, and creativity. Maybe you should remember that. Now we'll have a discussion time. We first have two eminent discussants. Professor Jae-jun Yoo, he is a professor of physics at Seoul National University. He graduated from Seoul National University with a bachelor and then went to Northwestern University in the United States, got a PhD, and worked at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then returned to Korea to work at Sogang University and then Seoul National University. His field is the study of electronic and magnetic structure of new materials like high TC superconductors or magnetic materials. And the second discussant is Dr. Sung-min Hong. He is an economist. He got bachelor's from Seoul University and then PhD also from SNU. And he worked at Korea Labor Institute and Hyundai Research Institute. And then he joined the STEPI, which stands for Science Technology Policy Institute, as a director in 2009. He published several books and he got several awards. Now, did you prepare any PowerPoint? No. Okay. So yeah, I think you can. You can talk there. Right. So each discussion will have about 5 or 7 minutes, and then we'll open the discussion to floor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and also I'd like to thank you to the audience. I'm a professor in the Department of Physics of Seoul National University, so I may take a position of scientist here. But on the other hand, I also serve as Associate Dean of College of Liberal Studies at SNU, so may talk a little bit about it as an educator too. I think as Professor Pearlescent mentioned the ABC, the action, boldness, and creativity engineering as a kind of pathway to the future education in science and technology. Yeah, I accept a lot of that. But also, I think I take some of the messages from Professor White's presentation that the attracting top students in science and technology field is a key, and also educating them with balanced curriculum-led or curiosity-led program is also a very important way in this science and technology education. Of course, the universities are playing a crucial role in higher education, especially in scientific research, and also producing workforces for industry and economy. And also, it is certain that the scientific and this technological innovation is a source of nation's future competitiveness. However, I think this science technology education in 20th or 21st century largely depends on the government policy. One of the reasons is a national economy or industry nowadays is very much coupled with technological advances. So the education, well, as well as the science and technology field itself, should also depends on how the government form a policy in the education as well as in overall the science and technology field. So, to access our science and technology education for future talents, I might ask a question so what is our education policy, especially in Korea, because I'm standing in a position of Korean community. So for the support of educating a science and technology talents. Maybe this is a little bit in sideways. So in fact, before I came here, since it was hosted by one of the hosts by the Ministry of Education and Science and Technology of Korean government, there are a couple of more important steps we are taking, especially by our government. The one is that our government has launched a kind of implementation of the STEAM project. STEAM means science, technology, engineering, art, and math education in K-12. That means elementary, middle, and high school programs. But of course, I think it's a kind of ideal program if it goes well, and if it really penetrates into the education system down deep below, so that all our young students can take up or get interest in this science and technology field, and they get attracted. So many of those talented students go into a higher education, especially in majoring in science and technology. However, I think our situation is a little different. That means that quite a lot of our education is biased by the college entrance exam, and also many of those students favor going to medical school or law school in the other field. So we need some way that we can actually attracting such talented students. Because that is our future. We connected our future directly. So we need to devise some way that we can hold up such the good students and talented students in this field. I know that we have for example, we have a science high school program or the science academy. So for the gifted students in science, and doing a lot of education system on that. But most of those programs, in my point of view, has failed because many of the graduate from science high school still favors or wants to go to medical school, not staying in a science field. So we need some way that we can actually promote and attracting a high quality students. Of course, one way is having a good education program in college or some prospect, showing some prospect for those young and gifted students, so they can actually have their they can achieve much higher the science or some other technology education. So I think that's one part. Another way is that we need also provide a supporting system for various science and technology projects. As we heard from Professor White's talk, that the balance between the curriculum-led or curiosity studies is crucial for future innovation in science and technology. And also attracting top students in science and technology is important. But so far, our science technology policy is more or less leaning toward a conglomerate style. I mean, bigger size and larger scale projects, instead of providing a solid ground for the basic science or any kind of fundamental structure in it. So, and also our government is investing heavily on some of these several projects to produce a hopefully Nobel Prize winner to be in the near future, which means that we're investing a larger portion of those funds only in limited scope or limited projects instead of spreading off and raising up a good backgrounds in general sense. So I don't believe that we can make a big step innovation just by focusing on a very few good-looking projects. Instead, Of course, we need to encourage advanced groups go further and make their best. But still, we should not neglect widening the scope of our science technology education for many more potential talents with balanced curriculum or curiosity and for the future innovation. So may I make some question to the speaker, Chairman? Or do I propose any? Well, I can.
You can make a comment or you can ask questions.
Well, maybe I think I just like to hear the opinions from
Right,
the
right,
speakers
okay,
later.
okay.
So yeah, let me finish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess Professor Yu mentioned two things. That one is both of the speakers mentioned how to make the education in the university excellent, but he raised how to attract good students to the university majoring in science technology major. And the other question is how to allocate government R&D fund to foster creativity rather than target-oriented or applied research. I guess this is, I think he feels that that's one of the big problems in Korea, in education as well as in research. Maybe both of speakers can have some comments or wise response to that. But before, wait, maybe you can get another discussion and then you can respond. Right, Dr. Song-min Hong, you might start.
예, 감사합니다. 저는 동시통역이란 좋은 제도를 그냥 그대로 이용하도록 하겠습니다. 죄송하지만 조금 들어주시기 바라고요. 그러니까 분들은 예, 제가 좋은 말씀 진짜 잘 들었습니다. 그리고 저희가 그동안 연구하면서 그리고 느껴왔던 가장 이공계, 우리나라 이공계에 있어서 우수 인재 육성, 과학기술 인력을 육성하는 데 있어서 가장 핵심 문제 두 가지에 대해서 좋은 힌트를 주셨다고 생각합니다. 그래서 그걸 좀 더 자세히 여쭤보고 싶어서 그거를 좀 중점적으로 여쭤보도록 하겠습니다. 저희가 생각할 때 이제 우수 인재 육성의 핵심 문제 두 가지는 앞에 유 교수님도 말씀하셨지만 자질이 우수한 학생을 어떻게 확보할 거냐의 문제입니다. 이게 가장 중요하겠죠. 근데 자질이 우수한 학생을 무조건 집어넣는다고, 그러니까 대학으로 무조건 집어넣게 한다고 되는 문제가 아니라고 저희는 생각합니다. 즉 근본적인 문제는 이 우수한 인재가 이공계 교육을 받고 나서 사회로 진출했을 때 어떤 직업을 갖고 어떤 비전을 갖고 얼마나 좋은 대우를 받고 비전을 갖고 사회에서 직장 생활을 해 나갈 수 있느냐, 평균적으로요. 몇몇 뛰어난 학생들도 중요한 예가 되겠지만 평균적으로 얼마나 우수한 대우를 받는, 아니면 사회적으로 인정을 받는 그런 직장으로 갈 수 있느냐, 이게 가장 중요한, 즉 좋게 저희가 전공적으로 얘기할 때는 경력 개발의 문제 혹은 좋은 일자리의 확보 문제와 연결이 돼 있다고 생각됩니다. 그렇게 그것이 무너졌을 때는 당연히 좋은 학생은 더 좋은, 자기가 더 우수한 학생일수록 자기가 더 많은 대우를, 좋은 대우를 받을 수 있는 다른 쪽으로 자꾸 가려고 하겠죠. 그렇다면 이 엔지니어들이 얼마만큼이나 좋은 일자리를 확보할 수 있게 해주느냐라는 것이 우수한 인재를 이공계로 끌어들이는 데 있어서 가장 중요한 문제 중에 하나라고 생각합니다. 그렇다면 선진국에서는 사실 이 문제가, 우리나라에서는 이런 것들이 많이 걸림돌이 되고 있다고 판단이 되고 있는데요. 선진국에서 혹시 이런 걸 위해서, 사실은 시장의 문제이기 때문에 대학만으로, 정부만으로, 기업만으로 뭐 이렇게 될 수 있는 게 아닌 경우가 많습니다만은 혹시 좋은 사례라든지 정부의 정책이라든지 학교나 기업이, 학교 특히 두 분 아마 교수님들이시니까 학교에서의 어떤 노력이 있는지 이런 걸 알려주시면 대단히 좋을 것 같고요. 두 번째로는 이제 들어온 인재를 그 다음에 얼마만큼 교육을 잘 시킬 것이냐라는 문제가 되겠죠. 근데 이 과학기술 쪽에 아까 좋은 발표도 해주셨지만 공대 졸업생들의 얼마만큼 우수한 사람으로서 배출을 하느냐, 즉 저희는 이제 공대 졸업생의 질 관리 문제라고 얘기를 하는데요. 이게 뭐 다시 아주 평균적으로 좋은 대우를 받는 거하고도 연결도 되겠습니다만 어쨌든 대학에서 배출되는 인재는 어쨌든 어느 정도 수준이 있다라는 것이 사회적으로 인정을 받아야 그 사람들이 좀 더 대우를 받고 또 그렇게 좋은 학생을 유인을 하고 이런 걸로 연결될 거라고 생각이 됩니다. 그렇다면 앞에 선진국의 솔직히 그 교육 시스템 자체가 저희랑 좀 다르고 그런 문제가, 그래서 아마 그 자체로서도 질 관리가 되는 것 같지만 특별하게 공대 교육 교육을 시킬 때 질 관리에 대해서 신경을 쓰시는 부분이 있는지 그런 어떤 사례나 좋은 제도 같은 것 있다면 좀 소개를 해주셨으면 되고요. 마찬가지로 아까 ABC라는 표현을 아주 잘 써주셨던 것 같은데 두 분이 다 그렇지만 두 분이 다 전혀 엔지니어란 자기가 갖고 있는 지식을 사회에 나갔을 때 어떻게 적응시킬 것이냐 이것을 가르쳐 주는 게 공학 교육이다라는 것을 계속 강조를 하셨다고 생각이 됩니다. 그것도 저희도 적극적으로 그렇게 생각하고요. 그렇다면 대부분의 엔지니어들은 사실 기업으로 가서 일을 하기 때문에 기업의 현실을 얼마만큼 알게 하느냐, 기업의 현실과 얼마만큼 연결이 돼서 자기 지식을 바로 기업에서 쓸 수 있게 하느냐 이게 굉장히 중요한 문제라고 생각이 됩니다. 근데 이걸 하려면 말씀하신 대로 ABC란 이런 제도를 갖고 커리큘럼을 갖고 밸런스된 커리큘럼과 뭐 큐리어시티를 갖고 뭐 같이 하는 것도 중요하지만 기업이 진짜 무엇을 같이 참여하게 할 것이냐, 대학 교육에서 무엇을 함께 해줄 수 있도록 해줄 것이냐 이게 상당히 저희 표현으로 하면 산학 협력을 인력 양성 측면에서 하는 게 상당히 중요하다고 생각이 되는데요. 그런 것들을 위한 특별한 제도나 아니면 무슨 사례 같은 게 있지 않을까라고 생각돼서 우리나라처럼 중소기업들, 많은 엔지니어들을 고용하는 중소기업들 같은 경우에는 여력이 없어서 대학 교육에 대해서 얘기도 못 해주고 하는 우리나라의 사례에서는 그런 것들을 좀 더 끌어낼 수 있는 그런 좋은 제도나 사례가 있으면 대단히 좋겠다라고 생각이 됩니다. 이런 부분에 대해서 좀 더 좋은 사례나 그 제도 같은 거 소개를 해주시길 부탁드리면서 제 토론을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 예, 이상입니다.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hong raised two very important issues. One is the career development of science engineers after they graduate, and the second one is the quality control of engineering students as well as industrial engagement in engineering education in the university. So, Professor Pearlescent, would you respond first?
Yes. How do we attract good students? I don't think you should hire a PR consultancy or any other thing. I think you should do what you think is right and tell what you're doing. You know, you don't want to attract people who are not really interested in what you're doing. So being very, very blunt about what are you offering your students. Don't say that you are an exciting university if you're not very exciting. Say that you're dull but deep, or that you have a high demands if you have high demands. Be very specific about it. We have had a fairly good attraction of students. Actually, it's grown every year for the past 10 years. Not by being smart in advertising or anything of that sort, but actually being enthusiastic about being engineers, by having our professors, the leadership, being just showing our own satisfaction or more than that, enthusiasm about engineering. You know, you cannot attract people by money, because if you're attracted by money, I think you should go into banking, or based on Western expertise, or no, not expertise, Western experience, you should probably be a medical doctor or something like that. Engineers are, in general, not very high salaried, but, you know, the right people may be triggered by something else and more important than salaries. For instance, the excitement of creating new solutions. And that's, I think, what we should say. Now, getting the best students is not getting the most intelligent students, because intelligent is just one thing. If you're intelligent and you have no creativity, you'll never be a good engineer. If you're intelligent and you have no boldness, you'll never be a good engineer. So to be a good engineer, you need a number of various kinds of gifts, and that's another matter. I would also perhaps say that the idea that I've heard now several times, and it was also mentioned now, that isn't it about time that Korea gets a Nobel Prize winner? Perhaps, but don't get me wrong. Nobel Prizes are praising the research of yesterday. Not in terms of topics. I am certainly impressed by Nobel Prize winners. But typically, they are not the ones who really did the great breakthroughs. The great breakthroughs they did scientific breakthroughs, no question about that, but not engineering breakthroughs. That's not the rule. Most of the great engineering breakthroughs have been done by masses of engineers working together. And therefore, it's difficult to give them a Nobel Prize. The breakthrough of wind energy is probably scores, hundreds of people through their ingenuity who have created that industry. You cannot give them a Nobel Prize because you can identify them. But that's how science and technology is of today. So it's fine to get a Nobel Prize. It's more than fine. It's admirable and everything. But that's not going to change society, in my opinion. Finally, I'd say, involving the corporate sector, what I say to business people is, if you're not offering good engineering students, or rather newly educated engineers, a good workplace, they'll go someplace else. You are really in competition to get the good engineers. If you're not supplying them with interesting jobs, possibilities to develop themselves, they'll go someplace else. The lifelong employment in one company is history. So I think just in order for them to get a hold of the good engineers, they will have, through a market mechanism, an inducement to treat these young engineers in a very attractive way. I don't believe in planning or laws or anything that should entice industry to do this, that, and the other. This plan economy has been tried out and exercised in Eastern Europe to very little success. I believe much more in the marketplace. And my final comment is, don't refer to my country and the Western country as advanced countries if you do not include South Korea. You are certainly as advanced as we are.
Thank you very much for encouraging words about Professor White.
Well, first of all, can I completely agree with the last speaker, particularly about the most recent comment about Korea being an advanced country, which I strongly do. I think there are a number of answers I'd like to just make, which are just some experiences. In terms of attracting students to STEM, I would still go back to the argument that role models and examples of success matter hugely. Having people on the staff or who've recently been involved in the staff who've had immense success in their careers is extremely important. I think from the University of Cambridge, our perspective is slightly different from that of an engineering school in that we believe very strongly that taking a STEM subject does not necessarily mean that engineering is the only thing you will do if you've done engineering. Like, it's interesting in countries like China, if you look at the Politburo, a very large number of those people are engineers. And actually there's a huge amount of contrast, of opportunities and skills and benefits that people who've done STEM can do right across the spectrum. And that is often important to make as a point to students thinking about which course to take to university, because often they'll end up doing engineering if they've gone in thinking, well, maybe I will or maybe I won't. You know, students' views change hugely, but making them, one thing we find in the UK is that if you say you're only ever going to do engineering, they feel, well, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that decision yet, so maybe I'll do something else. And I think that's a mistake. I also think increasingly that actually students doing STEM and engineering can make money. In Cambridge, the department that I talked about in that slides, one of their students has just sold his company he started not so many years up. He sold it for a total of $12 billion. He pocketed personally on his own 1 billion euros. So he's quite wealthy. Indeed, very wealthy indeed. So there are examples, and indeed actually one of our junior staff in computing science recently made several $100 million personally by doing a similar thing in another company. So there are these examples, and I think they can be helpful. I do strongly also believe that developing, as I indicated, these business clubs or systems whereby old students come back, the big companies come back, and indeed the mechanism of delivering university education as being a partnership with stakeholders is very important. The real benefits, like many of the excellent examples of open-ended, challenging projects which were highlighted from DTU. Many of those can also exist with, and I'm sure do exist in your own university, in partnership with companies. And that's an excellent way of embedding. And once a company can see that a student's doing really well, they ought to be trying to use that student, him or her, as best they can, and ought to give them the job that they want to commit. In terms of Nobel Prizes, I find it quite interesting, not least because Cambridge still, I think, has the largest number of Nobel Prize winners of any university worldwide still, which I always feel is rather unusual because our finances are much smaller than those of most of the leading American and indeed some of the European universities. The thing that typifies us in the cases we've got, I think we've something over 80 Nobel Prize winners in our university that have been linked to them, is often, yes, they involve the big projects, and I pay tribute to Korea for the excellence of its science research in recent years. It's been outstanding. But sometimes the Nobel Prizes can come from finding the really new idea at a very early stage. And I have to say I completely agree with this Professor Yu in his comments that a balance of those can lead to very, very good outcomes. And so I strongly support the discussant in that measure. In terms of quality, I could not agree more. If this is the type of education you want to provide, quality is everything. If the quality is not there, everything else is gone because students can see quality very easily. And that is a major challenge for many universities going forward, particularly those who, under new financial situations, will have to work harder and harder. I guess it means that universities need to take very clear decisions as to how many students they accept, what is the right level, what for their student-staff ratios, and for other things. And it might mean taking quite difficult decisions to focus on certain areas in response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for nice response. Now, the session is open to the general public and the floor. I think we can take one or two questions or comments from the floor. If you have any questions or comments, just raise your hand. Okay, please identify yourself briefly. Can you have a microphone here? Yeah. I hope you can make it brief.
My name is Byung-wook Kang from Hankuk Academy of Foreign Studies. In these days, fusion is quite an issue, I think. Fusion between humanities and science and technologies, fusion between business and science technologies, even between technologies themselves, which were traditionally regarded as different fields of science technology. So I was wondering about the ways to promote sense of fusion, those fusion and ability to fuse those diverse aspects of the world through university education. I would be grateful if you provide some excellent examples if you have any. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other question or comments? I guess he's a high school student, right?
Yeah.
He's wondering about convergence or fusion education or technology. Who would respond?
I could probably offer an answer. Anyway, I can do it how we do it at my university. When you get into a bachelor's program, a quarter of the program is about general competences and getting an impression of what engineering really is. 1/4 is science courses. 1/4 will be technology courses within the area of technology that the student may have chosen. And the last quarter, the student can select him or herself. Because our experience has been that people my age and a little bit younger do not know where the interesting fusions are of tomorrow. Maybe few know. We feel actually that the students, they don't know the field yet. They're not proficient in science and technology. That's why they're students. But they have actually often a sense of where the world is going. So we have had students composing their studies very interestingly. We have had students going into chemical engineering, and that last quarter, they've taken something in electrical engineering and combined that. We've also had some that supplemented by abstract mathematics. So they can have all kind of mergers, and we just make sure that 3/4 are made so that they'll have, you know, a good basis. But this merging is left up to the students.
Comment.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. We also, I think, in addition, would highlight the fact that it's very important in our courses, and I'm sure this is done at DTU as well, to have actually student-led non-curricular activities. So we've a lot of societies that have grand challenge competitions where teams often, and as I said, often it's the ones that come from all parts of the world working together do best. We'll have competitions, often funded by industry, to look for new opportunities or to try and do better than whatever's out there can do. We also have been very grateful for support that then allows those student-led activities to turn into major summer projects or internships where the students will actually go off to other universities in different countries, do the projects, and then come back and finish their studies. And actually, it's very important for, we feel, some of that vision to come through going away, being overseas. For example, organizations like Engineers Without Frontiers, you know, going out, getting engaged in countries, seeing what it's like in places that, you know, are very different from what you're used to, and coming back and saying, well, actually, what I saw there, I could do something better to help them, or I saw something, and although they've got more problems than we have, and clearly in a leading country like Korea, that'll often be the case. Actually, some of these ideas we could use to do something even better here. And for me, that's a very, very exciting part of university life, because the ideas are very special. But choice is absolutely essential, because students will see things we won't.
All right, thank you for a nice answer and advice. Are you okay? Just brief. Microphone.
Professor White talks about distributed innovation. One of the major differences between European, US, and other universities is the multicultural nature of that university, whereas Korea is still very monocultural in many ways. What can Korea do to kind of disrupt the kind of status quo that exists now within universities, to encourage more openings to international academics, to encourage more international students, and to encourage more international collaboration between universities in Korea and overseas?
Yes, this gentleman who is asking good questions is Dominic McCullis from British Embassy in Seoul. Any of you comment?
Well, I think you have to act as an engineer. You have to show action, boldness, and creativity. And my university apparently showed a little bit of that along with KAIST, because we met and decided that we could learn a lot from each other. And rather than waiting for a program or inducement from governments or whatever, we just did it. we felt that we had a lot to learn, not only in terms of science and technology, but in the way of doing it. It was very different at KAIST from DTU, and vice versa. Next week, a group of, I think, half a dozen, no more, of DTU professors will be at KAIST, and KAIST professors are at DTU. And the students are going back and forth, and it seems to be growing. I did a little bit in the beginning. My good colleague, Professor Namsa, did also quite a bit. But now it's out of our hands, as it should be, because now other engineers are finding these areas where they can be active, bold in their thought, and create new possibilities. So I think you should not create programs. You should just do it like a good engineer.
Dr. White?
Well, I'm not sure I should really comment, seeing the question was asked by an expert, but all I would like to say is that I know the University of Cambridge feels itself very privileged to have formal links with Korea at a number of levels, particularly if you go into our department, you'll see this big sign up saying KAIST, Cavendish Institute, and there's space set aside for that. And I think in addition, we've also feel very fortunate to have the privilege of working with companies like Samsung and LG. We've got very large programs with them, many of them contributing very closely, and we really just hope that we're of some value and that we can move ahead in partnership with you.
Okay, I might just add that the KAIST Cavendish project is funded by our foundation.
Very grateful.
All right, I think it's time to wrap up this session. Let me thank the speakers and discussants of this session, and thank you very much for your nice talk and comments and questions and answers. Thank you very much.